We haven't thought about this before. Is the exodus of the old school liberals from a far-left Democratic Party really genuine, or is it just political opportunism? This is a question that's sooner answered the better, and I think what Bill Maher on CNN said earlier this year is almost a flag in the timeline for what the Democratic Party had alienated people like him and shot himself in the foot as the election showed.
People who say to me, and there are many who say, I loved Bill Maher, but he has matured too much. He's become cranky. He's become crotchety. He's become one of those old guys who says,
Really?
The kids are crazy. It was better in my day. What do you say to them?
They're wrong. I mean, they're wrong, and the kids are crazy. It's interesting. They have this idea, the younger generation, maybe every generation does, that just because something is new makes it better. And that's not true. New is not synonymous with better.
But you're sounding like an old-fashioned conservative.
Okay. I heard a couple of people say, or maybe they wrote it online, that, well, I'm a hypocrite because you were for the demonstrators in 1968 or whatever it was when they were demonstrating against the Vietnam War. Yeah, that was very different. First of all, the students weren't against their own. These students were threatening other students. That didn't happen in the Vietnam War. And being against the Vietnam War made sense.
But as they say, common sense isn't as common as we wish it would be, especially today and in an age where Donald Trump is rallying the Republicans as the party of common sense. It tells you just how far America's political Overton window has shifted to the left. And by the way, when that happens, I think Bill Maher finds himself in a curious place. On one hand, his former friends on the far left are piling for a supposed right-wing rebrand, while there's people on the right that still distrust him enough to believe this rebrand is just an engineering shift to ram left-wing BS down the centrist voter base. And if you think about it, that's actually the best place to be politically, offending both ends of the spectrum equally. And yet, despite that, I think there's a clear direction in Bill's political ideology, because even in this very interview, he lists the absurd and radical political positions that modern left holds, while his major contention with the MAGA right is their alleged election denial. So implicitly, there's an understanding that ideologically it's the Democratic Party that's going way too far to the left, while at most, he can allege a cultish behavior around Donald Trump's populism on the right.
I haven't turned. Yes, people have said to me, you make fun of the left more than you used to. And guilty, I have, because the left has changed. Now, the right has changed also, and even worse. I mean, the right doesn't believe in democracy anymore. I mean, they've thrown their lot in with this sociopath named Donald Trump, who only thinks elections count when we win. Okay, well, that's worse. But it's not like the left hasn't changed also. So I'm going to call it out wherever I see it. I mean, there are things that have to do with, gender and race and free speech and just ideas about, you can be healthy at any weight, and gender is always a social construct, and maybe we should give communism another try, and maybe we should get rid of capitalism and the border patrol, and let's tear down statues of Lincoln and get rid of the police. Just, no. It's not that I've gotten old, it's that your ideas are stupid, okay?
Common sense is still common sense.
Yes, common sense is common sense, and I'm going to call it out wherever it is on the spectrum.
Could you imagine that? It's just more evidence that the classic liberal positions of yesterday have almost become incorporated into the modern center-right, especially on the issue of foreign interventionism. It is said that age can make you slightly more conservative, but perhaps we've been looking in the wrong way. It's the era and culture around you that's constantly in a flux to a more and more politically progressive version of itself across generations, leaving you behind. I mean, even if you read Bill Maher's latest book, What This Comedian Said Will Shock You, it's practically a complaint letter against the modern left for its political correctness and cancel culture that's only driving more young people to the right. You see that degree of tension whenever you see him sit across the table with people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or figures like Sonny Hostin from The View that seem to have cocooned themselves into an ideological bubble.
Well, I had a different question, but it struck me that in the first segment you used the term woke, and you said that woke is what was sort of ruining everything. And I know that you're...
No, I didn't say ruining everything. I said that's why Trump could get reelected.
That's why Trump could get reelected.
Yeah.
So the term woke has been, in my view, co-opted by the right, and weaponized and bastardized. And so I was surprised to hear you use the term because historically, as you know, because I think you're quite brilliant, that woke is a word used by the Black community to note that we must be aware of social injustices.
But words
and
migrate.
So why is that a bad thing?
It's not a bad thing, and originally that was absolutely a great thing. Alert to injustice, who's not for that? But words do migrate. Now, I'll use any term you want,
okay,
because maybe that is a word that's triggering, and so let's not use that word. I don't know, want to call it the super far left, but don't tell me the left
or maybe the super far right.
Well, he's talking about the left. Well, then
okay,
woke.
but we talked about that.
See, that's the problem. Why even say that to Bill Maher when he's the one trying to drag the Democrats back to a reasonable center so they don't keep losing elections? In fact, what's interesting is that this time Bill's endorsement for Kamala Harris in the final stretch of the campaign wasn't really an endorsement in any real sense. He said the only case that Kamala has for herself is, "I'm not Trump." For him, anyone that's not Trump is still good enough to vote for. How sustainable is that as a voting strategy, especially when Donald Trump will likely be phased out of the political scene over the next decade? But there's something else that I think Bill is sorely missing if he truly wants to be a catalyst for an ideological change on his own side. Right now, the real political fight isn't even between the left and the right, but within the left itself. You've seen Bill over the last 4 years stick up for Joe Biden at first, but then fawn over Gavin Newsom, and of course cover up for the Obamas, Clintons, and the Pelosi's. The through line between all of these is that they're part of an establishment left wing that both the party and the country at large has completely rejected. And if Bill Maher truly wants to be a catalyst for change, well, he'd start by calling for a truly populist shift among the Democrats that builds the party's manifesto and leadership from the ground up. Until that happens, he'll feel increasingly politically homeless and reluctantly backing so-called progressive candidates that he knows he can never defend.
To be fair to you, you've always also pointed out the right has gone even crazier embracing Trump. I want to ask you why you think it happened. Because, this was the party of Ronald Reagan. Free markets, free trade, loved immigration, very optimistic. What do you think made it, it's now dour, pessimistic. America is it's American carnage.
Well, I think the basis of it is we started to hate each other. I mean, you mentioned Ronald Reagan. Famously, he used to have a drink at the end of the day, often with Tip O'Neill, who was the leader in the House and the Democrat. But they were just two Irish Pauls who could get together and have a scotch at the end of the day. And they knew they weren't going to get along on many issues, but they didn't hate each other. They could drink together. That is inconceivable today. Can you imagine Joe Biden having a drink with Mike Johnson? It just would never happen. When you hate people, you don't listen to them. So it doesn't matter how reasonable they might be. We have reached this place where each side thinks the other side is an existential threat. You hear that term from both sides all the time. That is just a terrible place to be, because we find ourselves in this situation where both sides are literally siding with enemies of America rather than the opposition party within the country.
Really? That's a big stretch to say, because if he means the Russia trope, it has gotten old now, nearly a decade later, and it's a curious charge to level against someone when it's Trump that has called for a more isolationist policy, especially in Ukraine. Not just that, whether you like Trump or not, it's hard to deny that the Republican base has finally shaken off the shackles of the old neocon right-wing establishment with the McConnells and the Cheneys. Perhaps it's time that we see a similar churning of ideas in the Democrats as well, if only people like Bill Maher call for it rather than just sticking with the old establishment party just because it's not Trump. But let me know in the comments if you think he'll do that, because I'm sure the results of this election should be enough of a catalyst to make that happen.